Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, final boss in internet shitlords. And today, I'm doing what I think is going to be a short video that is addressing a subject that has come up many times before in my blogging and general shitlording career, which is these situations where you have feminist posters in the gaming hobby, a reflection of things they do in other hobbies as well, making these emotionally burdened posts or articles or essays where they try to play purely on empathy, where they describe the hobby as being full of horrific and terrible sexual harassment, right? And from this, they then justify the argument that therefore the hobby being full of this toxic masculinity, because there are women's accounts that sometimes they claim are their own, sometimes they say are other people that have told them things or things they have heard or things like that. Cases which ranges from, accounts of sexual assaults all the way down to people making fun of a woman for being a girl when she's gaming, right? So the whole spectrum. But the point is that because of this, and because this is so terrible, and because of these emotive stories of women who just wanted to game and end up being put into really uncomfortable positions by these awful people, including sometimes their own, the fellow players and their own game master, this means that we need to remove male influence from the hobby and make the hobby be under the control of a group of enlightened identity politics intersectionalist feminists who will then tell us exactly how we are or are not allowed to play. And another one of these videos came up recently and became quite popular on YouTube. You might have seen it linked on Twitter and whatnot. I'm not going to post a link to it here because it's basically just exactly the same thing. It's somebody making an account. Now, she starts with her own story about how she had gone to a gaming group the first time she ever played. And, the very first thing that ever happened to her, the first time she ever played D&D, was that the DM started out the player characters all being in a prison cell and naked, and that was all of them, and they were all guys except her, because I guess it was that scenario that particularly stupid DMs like to start out with. Oh, you're helpless and trapped and whatever, right? And then specifically had her character be raped with no possibility, knocked unconscious and then raped with no possibility of doing anything about it. And this was just seen as a completely normal thing. So later, then she goes on in the rest of her video to make similar accounts by other women and to argue that all of this represents the problem of toxic masculinity in the hobby and that the hobby has to be radically altered. Now, I kind of have to wonder. I mean, Christ, if the first time I played D&D, what happened in that account had happened to me, I probably never would have bothered playing again. So I would like to really understand. She claimed that she played with that same group for an entire year, and it was just as awful that entire year, which first of all means you're kind of, an idiot. If you keep doing that after that first session, if you still want to have anything to do with those people in particular, if not the hobby altogether, then, there's probably a real issue there, right? Because, why would you put up with that if this account was true? Now, I don't know if it was or if it wasn't. I'm not trying to judge it. But the second thing is that this is an argument that we hear over and over again, presenting this idea that this is just the normal way that male gamers act, right? That this is the norm of things. Now, every male gamer I've ever spoken to, and from my own perspective, I've never seen anything even remotely like this out of decades of gaming. I mean, I've been playing now for over 30 years. And in decades of gaming, all over the world, going to cons, being in gaming groups, going to gaming stores, interacting with gamers around me, online, in person, all of that, I cannot think of one case where anything like that happened, right? And even, for example, the kind of the classic misogynist, no girls, I don't want girls to play gamer, right? Those freaking nerds, right? Those wastes of space. I can think of like 2 people that were like that, right? I can think of a few more cases of guys who in some way behaved slightly, very slightly inappropriately in gaming groups that had women in them, right? Like, for example, being, excessively flirty or trying to be flirty in the game as, a mask for being flirty in real life, right? To try to hit on a woman gamer. And you know what? In all of those cases, like, first of all, the first thing that this says is that there's something clearly wrong here, because how is this so enormously epidemic as these women describe, when, for the most part, not just myself, but every other gamer I know who's been playing for as long as I've known doesn't have that epidemic happening on them. So, like, what's going on? Maybe it's the circles you keep, right? Like, let's assume, let's give the benefit of the doubt to the intersectional feminists that they're not lying, right? Then what we have to conclude is that the groups and the social context where they have interacted, where they've seen all of this terrible, horrible behavior, is completely different from the groups and social contexts I've interacted with. Now, I've mostly interacted with regular gamers, some of them left-wing, some of them right-wing. Most of them I have no idea, because we didn't talk about politics at all, right? And these are just ordinary people. I have to assume, if we want to believe that these accounts are true, that most of these women who make these accounts were therefore interacting with some other group with a context of people who don't hang around regular gamers. And guessing, based on the fact that they're intersectional feminists and intersectional feminism is their entire existence, it's it's what they seem to be constantly obsessing about online, then probably the social groups they're in are also all people like that, because of course they wouldn't put up with anyone else being, not like that around them, right? So I'm guessing the problem here is that their, SJW gaming groups are full of really toxic people, right? These Me Too movements waiting to happen. But, so like it's either that or they're grossly exaggerating, if not lying, the epidemic levels of these things happening, all right? But let's point out the fact that they probably do happen at least a bit, right? Like, these things do happen. And we don't want them to happen, right? This is something absolutely terrible. It's inexcusable, really. So, given that, what do we do as a solution to this? Well, here's the thing I noticed, right? In those few cases I saw of people behaving mildly inappropriately, or of people expressing a kind of stupid level of misogynist, the people who are doing this, the people who are like, hitting on a woman gamer character, her character instead of herself, or that were just kind of like being just generally sleazy. I mean, you know what I mean, right? Everybody knows what we mean here in this context. Those people, plus the other people, the ones that were like, no, I don't want any girls to game, they'll ruin everything, right? The extreme social retards that have gone to that length. They all have something in common, right? They're not particularly masculine. So it seems to me a complete error to define this as toxic masculinity. The solution to this problem isn't less masculinity, it's more masculinity, right? The people who are comfortably masculine and who are not relegated to this role of kind of beta or gamma males, that then they have to try to use these smarmy tactics to try to pick up women. or that they're just generally hostile to women altogether in an incel sort of way. You know, the people that aren't that don't need to rely on that aren't going to be the ones doing this, right? They're going to just be normal and interact normally with women. So the people that are responsible for all this behavior, whether they're using, you know, faking being feminist or pretending to have their character fall in love with your character in the game, or they're, you know, making rape jokes as an extremely socially retarded way of trying to get your attention because they have no other means to do it. Those are all functions of people with extremely failed masculinity, right? Those are people who are incompetent at being men. And in that context, the answer is for people who are competent at being men to do what men are supposed to do. And one of the basic functions of masculinity is to defend not just women, but including women, people who are in some way weaker than they are, from being harassed by other people, right? So if you are a man, right, and you see this happening in a gaming group, then you want to stand up and make sure that stops, right? And in my case, I've had a couple of instances where I've thrown people out of a gaming group that I was running because of behavior along these lines. Again, nothing as terribly exaggeratedly grotesque as what these videos and these articles usually portray, but it should never come to that, right? Like, we don't want it to come to that. We don't want it to be less than that. We don't want that sort of behavior at all, because we want everybody to be able to come and to be able to game, to be able to play D&D in a completely equal footing, right? And to not have to feel in any way discriminated against or attacked or anything else, because everybody should just be treated as gamers. And if you have these betas that are trying to either hit on or intimidate someone for being a woman at the table, then that's a really serious problem, and you solve it by manning up and saying something, right? The masculinity is the solution here. It's not the problem. The problem is a whole bunch of people, and maybe with younger groups it might be worse, because you have a whole generation of people who are told that behaving in a normal masculine way is wrong, so they're forced to then try to express their inevitable biological nature by ways that are completely warped and turned into something much worse than it would otherwise have been, right? Either as a kind of woman-hating incel, or as this kind of slimy, worm-tongued, male feminist faker, or passive-aggressive, friend-zoned cock, right? So you don't want to. The problem has been the decline of masculinity that causes these things, right? And the idea that we have to, the geek social fallacy, that is a thing I'll recognize, right? The idea that we have to tolerate these guys who are extreme in their social retardation. I've never put up with that. One of the things that made me famous as the RPG pundit was my lawn crapper essay in my blog, my old blog, where I described it as being that, if there's a guy, and you're in a welcoming neighborhood, it's a diverse and open and welcoming neighborhood, but there's a guy that goes on other people's lawns and takes a dump because that turns him on, right? You don't just say, okay, yeah, that's fine, we're going to put up with him, right? You don't, because then your neighborhood won't be fine anymore. It won't be nice anymore, right? So whether it's SJW fanatics, or whether it's these socially retarded people who are going to make things uncomfortable, or whether it's racists, or any of those elements, if we're talking about the real thing, and not, because you can't listen to what SJWs say, because unfortunately they've lost all credibility, right? You can't, they're the genderqueer who cried wolf, right? They say, they constantly lie, and so now you can't trust their perspective on who is or is not an acceptable person, right? Because to them, anyone who isn't them is a not acceptable person. But the rest of us, that doesn't mean that the rest of us are allowed to just throw away our sense of criteria, right? So if you actually are there and you actually see someone harassing a woman in a gaming table, it is your responsibility, as a gamer for starts, but also if you're male, as a man, right, to do something and stop what's happening, right? To prevent that sort of behavior. And I hope that you will. And I think that the biggest lie that the SJWs push is this idea that all men are fundamentally rapists, and that only extremist socialist control will stop them from, mass raping or something like that. When actually the vast majority of men, any man who's well balanced in their masculinity, will be exactly the opposite of that and will despise that sort of behavior, right? So the answer here is to encourage a healthy masculinity, not the type of flawed feminized masculinity that the SJWs and the intersectional feminists have been pushing for years, that ends up creating these passive-aggressive worm tongues that end up doing this sort of bullshit that is precisely what the feminists are now complaining about, right? That's not masculinity. Masculinity is standing up and being a man, which includes protecting women. So that's everything for today. If you like this video, please share it. Share it anywhere that you think some people will like it, or that it'll piss off certain people too. And be sure to subscribe. I can't believe that we're already at like 1,040. Like, just, my last video was my 1,000 subscriber special. Now we're like getting close to 1050 there. Let's keep going until we get to 2,000 now. And beyond that too. So share and subscribe. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't subscribed yet. Hit the notification bell so that you get wind of the videos. And share the video everywhere so that more people will find out about this channel. If you like what I do and you want me to do more of it, and you want to encourage me, then you can support me. And I mean, you could support me on PayPal. I have Patreon. I have a Patreon link below, but really I would suggest the best way that you could support me would be by backing my products, stuff like Lion and Dragon, Dark Albion, my other books, or if you're looking for something a little more economic, though really we're talking about like 25 and like $20, right, for beautiful books. They're not very expensive books. We're not talking about some ridiculously overpriced, $80 book or something like that. They just have that kind of value, but not that kind of price. But if you're looking to just spend a couple of dollars, you want to give me a tip, right? And you want to get something out of it too, then check out in Drive-Thru RPG or on the Presses Intermedia website, the RPG Pundit Presents series, which is a weekly series of mini source books that'll have either adventures or setting areas, or new rules, random tables, all kinds of interesting stuff for your OSR games. There's half of they go alternating pretty much week by week between a medieval authentic, which is stuff that you can use for Lion and Dragon or Dark Albion or any game where you want to have like a more authentic medieval experience in your game, or Gonzo gaming, which is just the opposite. It's science fantasy with all kinds of weird and crazy stuff. Our new product that's coming up right now is going to be, and it's coming probably tomorrow, or maybe even today by the time this video comes out, is called The Bungalow of the Beach Giant Chiefs, which is a gonzo adventure for mid-level or high-level characters, call back to a classic TSR series. So you really want to check out The Bungalow of the Beach Giant Chiefs. And it's a great way to support me and get something out of it too for your gaming interests. But if that doesn't call your attention, look up any of the other 74 issues so far, and I'm sure you'll find something you like. So thanks again, and remember to keep sharing. More than anything, keep sharing the channel. Currently smoking, near up poker, plus barking dog.